Scuba's expensive, and buying your own gear is actually one of the best ways to save money in the long run. One great way to keep gear costs low is buying used. There's tons of great deals to be had out there if you know what you're looking for. But if you're new to buying gear, where do you even start? I'm Jamie, dive master and scuba enthusiast. Thank you for tuning in today. By the end of this video, you'll know how to make informed decisions about buying secondhand scuba gear, as well as when you're gonna wanna pass. We'll go over buyer bewares for 10 items of scuba gear, and I'll offer my recommendations on whether it's worth considering buying something used versus when it might be better to just opt for new. Now, if you happen to fall into the demographic of somebody who's incredibly gear savvy, like service your own regulator savvy, then this might not be the video for you. Actually, stay tuned. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Before we get into any specifics, keep in mind that anytime you buy gear secondhand, you're taking a gamble. And to help mitigate some of that risk, there are 5 universal questions you need to ask yourself before taking the plunge. Number 1. What compromises are you willing to make? Beggars can't be choosers. You're going to be limited by what's available on the secondary market. If you're really choosy about what you're getting, then buying used might not be for you. Number 2, what information is available about that item? Get as much detail as you can and then hop on the internet and get to work. Look for reviews, recalls, do as much research as you can. Number 3, can you try the item before you buy it? If you have no way to verify whether something works or how well it's going to work for you, then you may end up with some serious sunk cost. Number 4, how much do you trust the seller? And even if it's somebody you know really well, keep in mind that scuba divers tend to think very highly of their own kit. I'm sure that BCD was cutting edge back in the 80s. Know what else was? A 5 megabyte computer hard drive. Dive technology's come a long way too. Number 5, if the seller isn't being truthful or it just doesn't work out, then what's it going to cost you? Think about things like, can you return the item if it doesn't work as advertised? How much is servicing or repairing it going to cost? And how important is warranty to you? Chances are, if you bought an item secondhand, you might not get great support from the original manufacturer. Now that that's out of the way, let's get into it. First up, masks. I'd really recommend considering buying a mask new. There's lots of great options on the market today, and it's really important to make sure that you get something that fits really well. But I suppose you could go used as long as you don't mind wearing someone else's snot rocket container. When you see it in person, check for fit. Never buy it unless you can try it on first and verify that it's a good fit for you. Now, there's a right way to do this. Place the mask on your face. Don't put the strap on, just let it dangle. With the mask resting against your face, gently inhale through your nose to create a little bit of suction. Remove your hand and see if that tiny bit of suction is enough to keep it on your face. If you have facial hair, there's likely to be a little bit of air leakage, but you should still be able to keep it on without much effort at all. Bring a snorkel or a regulator mouthpiece to get a good idea of how the mask will fit when you have a mouthpiece in your mouth. Check for signs of excess wear or damage. Inspect the lenses, the skirt, the strap, and all connections for scrapes, cracking, warping, or other signs of wear. Watch out for plastic lenses. You're going to want tempered glass. When you buy it, it's safest to assume that you're going to need to replace the mask strap, so make sure that you can find one that's compatible with that mask. Even if you don't need to replace it right away, it's always a good idea to carry a spare. Next up, snorkels. Okay, you might be thinking that's not scuba gear, except it is, because most certifying agencies require that you have a snorkel for open water class. And it's really a good idea to carry one as a scuba diver anyway, for reasons that we'll get into in a future video. Also, seriously, just get a new one. Snorkels are not that expensive unless you go for the really overly fancy, complicated ones that you really don't need. But there's no serious concerns with buying a used snorkel, other than it's gross. So I guess you could do it. If you do want to buy a used snorkel, give it a close inspection. Check for damage and wear, like cracking, splitting, or missing pieces. Carefully inspect the mouthpiece and baffle. When you buy it, make sure that it either comes with a snorkel keeper that's in good shape, or order a new one. They're really cheap. Next up, fins. Absolutely yes. A good pair of used fins can be a great find. Check for fit. Just like a pair of shoes, you'll want them to fit snug but not tight. Even just a little too tight and they can cause your feet to cramp. Inspect the blade, foot pocket, and straps for damage or wear. If they're the open heel variety, you'll also need a pair of boots that fit you, the fins, and the type of diving you'll be doing. When you buy them, it's safest to assume that you'll need to replace the fin straps. Even if you don't need to replace them right away, it's always smart to carry extras. Next up, regulators. I have sort of mixed feelings about this one. As long as you know exactly what you're getting and that it works, go for it. Get as much detail as you can about what's being offered. Get on the web and do some research before you go see the regulator in person. Make sure you know the make and model of the first stage and both second stages. Check for recalls, whether it's balanced or unbalanced. I'd universally recommend a balanced regulator, whether it's DIN or YOKE. I'm not getting into the merits of either in this video, but just understand the basic difference. A YOKE first stage regulator looks like this. It's the more common type. YOKE regulators are not recommended for use with high-pressure cylinders over 3,300 psi or 227 bar. A DIN regulator looks like this. Unlike the YOKE style, the DIN regulator has a captured O-ring, which you'll want to inspect as part of your purchase. You can use a DIN regulator with a YOKE adapter, which allows you to use it on a YOKE valve cylinder. Figure out the service intervals for that regulator from the regulator manufacturer. Some need to be serviced annually, some every other year, and some fancy regulators only need to be serviced once every 3 years. The cost to service a regulator varies quite a bit by geography. In my area, it's about $130. So having one that needs to be serviced every year versus every other year can make a big difference in the overall cost for that regulator. Also, make sure to look into the availability of replacement parts for that regulator, as well as whether it can even be serviced at your local dive shop. Not all older regulators can be serviced due to the availability of replacement parts, and not even all modern regulators can be serviced at all dive shops. So make sure that your dive shop is able to service that regulator, or where you need to send it for service. Check for any recalls, and if you want to be extra fancy, you could look to see if it's a piston or diaphragm regulator. There are pros and cons to each, but honestly, as a beginner, you can't really go wrong with either. When you see it in person, check for signs of damage or excess wear. Carefully inspect the first stage, including under the dust cap. You shouldn't see buildup or corrosion that may indicate a problem inside the first stage. Check all the hoses and fittings for cracks, kinks, or fraying, including under any hose protectors. Make sure any swivels move freely. Carefully inspect the outside of the second stages for any hairline cracks or corrosion. Inspect inside the mouthpiece for damage or nastiness. If the mouthpiece itself is tearing, it's easy to replace, and that's something you're probably going to want to do anyway. Now hook it up to a cylinder and pressurize it, slowly at first, then completely. Listen for leaks. Operate the purge buttons. Breathe on it. Operate the demand or Venturi dials. If at all possible, try before you buy in safe, controlled conditions. At a minimum, See if you can submerge each second stage in a bucket of water to check for leaks. If you choose to buy it, assume that regulator is going to need to be serviced before you take it out on a dive. Even if you're told that that regulator is within its service interval, regulators can take a lot of abuse between servicings, and it's always better to be safe than sorry. It's also a really good idea to replace the mouthpiece, partly because that's something that can experience a lot of wear, and also because that's just kind of gross. Luckily, replacement mouthpieces are pretty cheap, and it's always a good idea to have a backup. And if you bought a DIN regulator, make sure you pick up some spare O-rings that fit the DIN. Next, BCDs. A BCD can be a great find secondhand, but it can also be a little tricky, so make sure you know what you're looking for. First, understand whether the BCD you want to use is back inflate, which can include a back plate and wing, but not necessarily, or jacket style, or something else. I'm not going to go into side mount or tech rigs in this video. If you're not sure what type you want to get, then I would definitely recommend trying a few different kinds before committing to a purchase, whether that's new or used. Once again, get as much detail as possible, get on the web, and do as much research as you can into that BCD. Always find out if there were any recalls. Not every recall means that you must avoid a purchase under any circumstances. Just know what you might be getting into. For example, a popular style of oceanic BCD was recalled mid-2023 for the handles on the weight pockets breaking. That's definitely a safety concern, so you may want to assume that you need to buy new weight pockets for that BCD. And you might even be able to get the seller to knock down the price a bit. Figure out how much lift the BCD has and whether that's going to work for the type of diving you want to do. For example, a BCD with 25 pounds of lift is not going to work for a cold water diver who typically needs to carry a lot of weight in order to offset the buoyancy of their suit. Check to make sure whether that BCD has features you do or don't want, like zipper pockets or integrated weights, or an air integrated octo, which is where the inflator actually has a secondary octo built into it, which is something that some divers really like. And I am not one of those. When you see it in person, check for fit. Try it on like a backpack and adjust the straps. A good fit would be somewhere in the middle range of those strap adjustments, not on either extreme. Inspect the whole unit, paying special attention to the inflator hose and mechanism. Check all the straps and clips for wear or plastic fatigue. If the BCD has an integrated weight system, check to make sure all the pieces are in place and functional. Inflate the BCD until it's good and puffy. Check for leaks by gently squeezing. If it's losing any air, pass on the purchase. Not all leaks are easily repairable. Check to make sure all of the deflate options, like the deflate button and dump valves, work properly. I strongly recommend setting that BCD up in a full scuba unit with a cylinder and a regulator. Connect to that inflator hose and check to make sure that the power inflator is working correctly and doesn't stick. After you buy it, it wouldn't be a bad idea to bring the BCD into a shop that can service it. Check for leaks and perform any necessary repairs, including overhauling that inflator. Next up, computers. It's definitely possible to get a great deal on a good used computer. Now, keep in mind that technology changes quickly, so I would avoid anything that's over 10 years old. And once again, make sure that you get as much information about that computer as possible and do some research. You should know whether you want a console computer, which hooks up to your regulator through a hose, or a wrist mount, and whether air integration for that wrist mount is important to you. You're also going to want to know whether you want to program your own air consumption, depth alerts, and so on and so forth, as well as whether you need something that can handle exotic gas mixes or decompression stages. You're also going to want to know what algorithm that computer uses and the merits of that algorithm. Also, make sure you know whether the computer you want has a rechargeable battery or replaceable batteries, and how easy or hard it is to replace that battery yourself. Now, before you contact the seller, make sure you carefully scrutinize the deal. If it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. Don't get scammed. Again, check for recalls, and another thing I'd recommend is checking to see if that computer has an app that integrates with it. That app is going to affect your daily use and your overall experience with that computer, so it's best to know what you're getting into. Also, make sure that you're able to figure out how that computer works. Most computer manuals today are available somewhere on the World Wide Web. If you can't find it, I'd avoid it. When you see it in person, make sure you know that computer works. So turn it on, press all the buttons, navigate through any menus there might be. If you've been paying attention, you've done some research up until this point and should know some of the basics. If there's any kind of air integration, make sure you know that works by connecting it to a cylinder and pressurizing it. Bonus points if you can check it alongside an analog gauge. Just remember that it's acceptable for an analog gauge to be off by around 100 psi. If you decide to move ahead with a purchase, I would recommend getting a backup battery and O-rings for the battery compartment if you have the type of computer that has replaceable batteries. And it's also not a bad idea to get a few extra screen protectors, and if it's a wrist mount, get a replacement wrist strap. I'd also recommend using a backup computer for the first several dives you take with this new used computer. And if you don't have a backup computer available, definitely a submersible pressure gauge, depth gauge, and timing device so that you're able to end your dive safely if that computer fails. Next up, weights. This one's a no-brainer. A heck yes! You can save a bunch of money buying weights used instead of new, but there are some buyer bewares here. For starters, make sure you know how much weight you need and in what increments, keeping in mind that you should have a balanced amount of weight on either side of your body to be in good trim. So you're gonna want kind of even numbers to make sure that you maintain that balance. It never hurts to have extra weights in a variety of increments. Also understand the difference between hard weights and soft weights and whether you have a preference for one over the other. Weights are usually charged by the pound, so it wouldn't be a bad idea to bring a kitchen scale or maybe a luggage scale to make sure that what they're selling you is what you're expecting it to be. And for soft weights, inspect the bags to make sure they aren't so worn that they're losing those little pellets. Next, cylinders, aka tanks. It's possible to get a good deal on a used cylinder, but it's also very possible to get totally hosed and spend a bunch of money on something that ends up being the world's least practical paperweight. Now, I could do a whole video on just cylinders, but here's some basic buyer bewares. Know whether you want a yoke or a DIN style valve to match the type of regulator you have. Get as much information as you can about that cylinder. A good seller is going to have no problem sending you photos of all of the markings on the outside of that cylinder. Here's what you're looking for. The manufacturer. DOT, TC, or both. DOT stands for Department of Transportation, the USA Regulatory Authority, and TC stands for Transport Canada, the Canadian Regulatory Authority. Make sure the cylinder has the marking for the country you'll be diving in. The original hydrostatic inspection date, representing the year of manufacture. We'll come back to that in a minute. The last hydrostatic inspection date. If it isn't within the last 5 years, you'll need to get it hydroed before you can use it. The cost to hydro a cylinder varies, but in my area, it's about $55. If it fails hydro, the cylinder may be condemned and rendered unusable. You may also want to note the capacity and working pressure in PSI or bar. The most common size is 80 cubic feet or 11.1 liters, though some people prefer larger for more air or smaller because the tanks are lighter and some divers have tiny mouse lungs. Not me. The visual inspection date sticker. If it's out of date, you'll need to get it vised before a shop will fill it. In my area, that costs around $20. While it's sort of true that tanks don't really go bad, there's definitely some things that you should be aware of. There are known problems with certain Luxfer aluminum cylinders manufactured between 1972 and mid-1988. They're made of a particular alloy that's susceptible to cracking. If a cylinder is stamped with a VE, it's definitely one of these, but it may not have that stamp. I have heard of some shops that just won't fill any aluminum cylinders older than 1990. So for that reason, I just avoid anything older than that. Cylinder valves may age and fail long before the cylinder itself, so you might need to be prepared to pay for a new burst disc, or a valve rebuild, or even an entirely new valve. When you see it in person, inspect to verify the cylinder markings and visual inspection dates match what you were told. Inspect the outside. Some dings, enamel wear, or paint chipping is completely normal, but avoid anything that has deep gouges anywhere. If it has a boot, ask the seller to remove it so you can check for excessive corrosion or damage. This one has some salt buildup, but otherwise looks pretty good. Check to see if there's air in the tank. Be a courteous customer and ask the seller to do this rather than just opening the valve yourself. But if they refuse, I would consider that a red flag. Cylinders need to be stored with some air inside to keep moisture out. If a cylinder was stored completely empty without any air in it whatsoever, then moisture can get into it and react with the metal on the inside. For an aluminum cylinder, that means maybe some surface corrosion, but for a steel cylinder, a little bit of rust can actually do a lot of damage. A tumble might take care of surface corrosion, but there are no guarantees. After you buy it, take it in for a visual inspection and hydrostatic inspection if they're due, and have the valve cleaned and serviced if it needs to be. If it's an older valve, then consider just replacing it altogether. Now, if you're lucky enough to find a cylinder that is within its visual inspection date, hydrostatic inspection date, and is full of air, I would recommend emptying that cylinder and getting it refilled before taking it out for a dive. Never dive with unverified gas. If you get a YOKE style valve, also have a supply of spare O-rings. I always have a hard time remembering the right size O-ring, so I'll put a link below for the one that fits most of today's valves. Next up, wetsuits. You can certainly find good used wetsuits out there. The matter is, do you really want to go there? If you're the type of person that doesn't mind buying somebody else's used underwear, then by all means, go for it. They say there's only two kinds of divers, and while that's not entirely true, speaking as someone who physically couldn't pee in their own wetsuit for the entire first year of diving, it's always safest to assume that someone has. Another reason to avoid used neoprene is that it degrades fairly quickly over time and loses some of its insulating properties, which are the whole point. And if the prior owner didn't take great care of it, maybe left it out in the sun or exposed it to too much heat, then it's even worse off. For those reasons, I really wouldn't recommend buying used neoprene. But if you want to go for it, here are my suggestions. Make sure the suit is the appropriate type and thickness for the water you will be diving in. Good neoprene should be springy and soft. If it looks faded, cracked, has creases, or doesn't stretch well, it's not going to insulate well, and it probably won't be very comfortable either. Check for holes, especially around the knees, seams, and the zipper. Many kinds of holes can be patched with the right tools and good technique. Also, make sure you have the opportunity to try it on. Don't trust the size on the tag, don't trust the size charts on the internet, just try it on. And lastly, this should go without saying, but wash it thoroughly before using it. Next, dry suits. It is possible to get a deal on a used dry suit. It is also very easy to get hosed. It is not easy to check for leaks on a dry suit. In order to properly do so, you'll need to seal up all the openings, inflate the dry suit, and spray the whole thing with soapy water, checking for bubbles. Some scuba shops can do this for you for a fee. You'll also need to assume that you need to replace the neck and the wrist seals. Even if those seals are in good shape, they may not fit you. This is something that you might be able to do yourself with the right equipment and the right technique, or something that you can pay your local dive shop to do for you. If the zipper needs to be replaced, it can easily cost over $500 to have that done. If any leaks are found, you'll need to repair those. You may need to look into replacing boots or socks. So it's possible to sink a ton of money into making a dry suit diveable for you. There's also some great deals to be had on new off-the-rack dry suits. So I would really recommend just going for a new dry suit. Scuba is expensive, and we should want it to be accessible. The truth is, buying new gear just isn't an option for everyone. And if you find yourself in that camp, my hope is that you feel empowered to make informed decisions about buying secondhand scuba gear. Now, if you can afford to buy new, that is never, ever a bad decision. And as tempting as it can be to get a good deal on Amazon or some big box online store, buy it from your local dive shop if you can. Every dollar you spend in your local economy is an investment in your community. Most local dive shops are going to offer you better support than an online store would. If something goes wrong, a good dive shop will make it right. Dive shops have relationships with sales reps from those big scuba brands that want their repeat business, so they can advocate for you if something needs to be repaired or replaced. They can even help you file a warranty claim. Oh, but my dive shop doesn't carry brand X or this widget thing. Have you asked? They might be able to source it for you. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you learned something. If you've had good experiences or bad experiences with used gear, let me know in the comments. And if you think I missed anything, let me know that too. Until next time, dive safe, dive responsibly, and always have fun.